Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online Alicization anime review. This one's going to be for episode 30, which is called The Battle of the Knights. So with this episode, we finally start off the war for the underworld. The gate falls, we start the final load test, and the two armies clash. Now, primarily this episode focuses in primarily on the right flank of the battle and also the central column of the battle. So we get Dusselbert and Finatio as the focused characters, with a little bit of an introduction to some of the other stuff going on. On the Dark Territory side of things, we have, of course, Dusselbert primarily battles the sort of Goblin Chieftain, the new Goblin Chieftain, because of course Shasta killed the previous one. And then Finatio faces off against the leader of the Giants. And then we just get some setup that like Eldrier on the left flank, which is the weak flank, is facing off against the other Goblin leader. So, just setting stuff up. Like we also get like here the middle columns like include some of these other Integrity Knights, including Renry, who I think we're going to get a focus on in next week's episode. I'll talk about him towards the end. And then we also, of course, get some other Integrity Knights introduced who we don't know too much about. And just we get to sort of see some of the other ones. Like we get a little bit on Alice, a little bit with Bercoli, but like I said, primarily the focus here is Dusselbert and Finatio. So let's go through that. I'll start with Dusselbert because he's sort of the MVP of this episode in terms of the opening section of the battle. Who proves to be the most useful? It's definitely Dusselbert. He's the archer, he's the Integrity Knight archer of the group with the conflagration bow, so of course he uses that to his advantage and just starts taking out swaths of goblins. Just every single arrow seems to take out about 50 to like 100 goblins, and he just fires and fires and fires until he runs out of arrows. And along the way they set up this idea that like what is driving him to fight? Now that he's no longer working for Administrator, what is driving him? And it's just to protect the world where he at one point had a happy life with his wife. The one memory he has of that moment of, you know, his wife kind of holding his hand, the rings on their fingers, and him getting a slight glimpse of what she looks like. He's fighting for the fact that this is the world where that happened at one point. Even if he doesn't remember it, even if it's gone, it happened, so he's going to protect that. I like that as just a small little thing to drive him forward. And then the other thing in terms of like the battlefield is, as the archer, he has to rely on the rest of his men to sort of defend him up close, because he has to basically just be locked in position, focusing on the enemies off in the distance, so he can't focus on the people who are coming right up to him. So he has the other knights just, you know, basically sort of sacrificing themselves right in front of him to defend him. And this is kind of what happens as they get closer and closer, as he starts to run out of arrows, as you see the sort of desperation come in, as he has to switch to his own sword to go up close. And then I think it's Golgoroso who actually is here primarily defending Dusselbert, and to defend him in his big kind of moment where like initially he thinks he's lost, he comes up with that sort of clever solution that maybe if some of this stuff hadn't happened, him just as an AI following the rules, he might never have come up with this idea. But he puts his sword into his bow as like the last arrow and just fires it and annihilates the goblin leader along with a huge amount of other goblins. And it seems like the right flank is shored up for now. A sort of big victory on the right flank for the Integrity Knights. So I thought that was just a really strong showing from the character to really just get across, like, yeah, we saw him fight Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh, but he is amazing actually when you really break it down. So very fun to see Dusselbert. The central column was very interesting with Finatio, in that she starts off the battle also from range, basically trying to snipe the leader of the Giants, because he's much taller than the rest of them, so of course she's just going to try and take his head off and ruin the leadership. And she nearly does it. She takes his ear off and kills a bunch of people next to him. But the effect that this has on him is very, very intense, and I love the way that they showed this. Initially it just feels like he's afraid because he was killed from such high range and such a powerful attack. But what happens is that fear sort of turns into this effect on his light cube. We see a cutoff to, the light cube cluster, and it begins to sort of vibrate, glow, it activates something, and he goes from being terrified to sort of transforming that fear into just pure bloodlust, the want to kill Finatio, who he is afraid of. And it makes him incredibly powerful, incredibly fast. And the other effect that it has is that it his light cube effectively is exuding so much energy. This is kind of his incarnation in a way. You also see his right eye begin to glow, as if it's touching the boundaries of the seal of the right eye. And of course, on the dark territory side of things, it is the idea that you follow who is the strongest above all else, and so that's interesting. But he charges at Finatio, goes to completely smash her. His light cube basically stops her short. We see that effect of his light cube sort of connecting to hers, the Fluctlights sort of connecting together, and it's sort of just paralyzing her in place. That's how intense his sort of feelings are in this situation. And it looks like she's about to be killed until one of her whirling blades comes in and steps in front of the blow. This character, Dakira here, gets a very kind of strong moment as she blocks this blow, fends it off, but has, basically is killed in the process. She gets her last words after this, but it's a very brutal scene as her armor cracks. You get the sense every bone in her body is breaking during this moment. Such is the dedication and devotion to protecting her commander. And when we get the moment that sort of snaps Finatio out of the sort of paralysis from this light cube attack, effectively, we get what ends up being an interesting moment in the anime in terms of them skipping over a little bit of backstory that is given in the light novel, and it taking some of the context away from what's happening in the anime. So I'll cover that here. I think the anime did an okay job at getting this scene across, in that they changed her final words from the official English translation for the of the light novel to the anime to make it, I think, come across as being sort of more romantic intent from Dakira towards Finatio, whereas it's more of the rest of the backstory with Dakira that gets across her romantic interest in Finatio. In that, in the anime, what she says is I'll always adore you forever. And I'm kind of wondering, could they have translated that to love to really get it across, given that they weren't doing the rest? But I think the scene that you have, the only way to view it is approaching romance, I think. Otherwise, it's just this kind of thing of wait, what's so specific about this one whirling blade that it's just Finatio and her smiling at each other with no context given, if it's not meant to be a sort of romantic thing. Obviously a one-sided romantic thing, but still something to add to Dakira as a character. So let's go to the light novel here to cover some of this. So it says here, I'll just read the first paragraph or so. Since her awakening as an Integrity Knight, Lower Knight Dakira Synthesis 22 had dedicated her entire existence to just one person. Her sworn benefactor was Vice Commander Finatio. Dakira was smitten with Finatio's ferocity to a cause, and with the anguish that she hid beneath that firm exterior. By the standards of the human world, her feelings were nothing short of romantic love. But for various reasons, Dakira had bottled up her feelings and given up her very face and name to be one of the four whirling blades who directly served under Finatio. It was joy beyond measure for Dakira to simply work at her hero's side. Then we get the sacrifice moment in the novel happening, talking about how much she wants to protect her, that she won't let this enemy have her, basically, have Finatio. And then we do get, so in the narration here, Dakira's backstory. Dakira was born and raised in a little seaside village in Suthercross. Her parents were poor fishers without even a last name. Yet despite that, she grew up strong and healthy and helped out with the family work, until she committed a taboo at age 16. She fell in love with a friend of the same sex who was 1 year older. She couldn't have acted on those feelings, of course. In her anguish, Dakira went before the altar at the empty church late at night and prayed to Stacia for forgiveness. That altar was linked to the central cathedral's automated Senate organ, and Dakira was taken to the Axiom Church for violating a taboo, wiped clean of all memory and made into an integrity knight. The older girl whom Dakira had fallen in love with, whose name she could no longer remember, looked just a little bit like Vice Commander Finatio. And it's just, it gets across, the magnitude that it was love both times, both in the past, and what caused her to become an integrity knight, what taboo Dakira broke, plus now in the present day, now that they're sort of free of that, and it's still an aspect of her character. It's just a fun little thing to add in. I don't think the anime cut it out because it didn't want to show this sort of LGBT content or anything like that. I do think, like I said, that they did change the final line to try and get that across. In the light novel, her final words before she dies are, my lady Finatio, I have always pined for you." It's just kind of an interesting, like the word pined, like it gets across the effect. It's kind of a odd word to use, actually. I'm kind of surprised with the translation in the book. But I think adored, like, I think there's enough like leeway there where you can get across more of the actual intent. But still, it's one of those things where I don't think this is as bad of a situation as like skipping over like Shasta's like whole backstory with Bercoli and his own master and the explanation of his ability. I think that was a much more sort of egregious example of just skipping over a good amount of pages, whereas in this case it's a 3-page arc for this character, and they just kind of skipped over effectively like 2 of those pages. So I just think it's important to get that out there in terms of what they did and did not cover. As for the rest of the episode, of course, after this, Finatio fires up, basically cuts the leader of the Giants in half. Amazing moment there to sort of take revenge for Dakira here. Really nice moment. Just seeing her care so much about the loss of one of her whirling blades here, and show the rest of her soldiers that, she's back up and running. We then get sort of call out to the idea that the left flank is the weak flank because Eldrier is leading it, and while he's skilled, he's inexperienced, and we see the sort of tricky the other goblin chieftain, take advantage of that, throwing some smoke grenades in there and just using it as a kind of cloud cover to just basically get through his forces, because with the smoke they can't just wildly swing because they might hit each other, so they just have to let them through. And we get the setup that Renri is like the back, is commanding sort of the back of the left flank, and near the supply tents, which is where Kirito, Ronye, and TS are. So that's the sort of plot setup for what's sort of about to happen next, is that the goblins have broken through Eldrier, and they're going to be heading for Renri, but Renri's nowhere to be found because he's terrified in the middle of battle. He's like seemingly like the youngest integrity knight. He's hiding out in the storeroom, and we need to get him up and running. So I think it's a cool setup. I actually really like this arc with Renri in the light novels, and I think they're going to have to do a pretty good job at it here because it is sort of integral. Renri becomes sort of a real key player with the Integrity Knights once he gets up and running, so it's going to be fun to see. And yeah, like I said, he's right next to pretty much where like Ronye, TS are. They're protecting Kirito, so some big stuff is about to happen here. And of course we have the other two younger Integrity Knights noticing that this is happening and kind of sneaking off to see what's happening with Kirito, basically. So a few interesting bits of setup here. Final things are just that we do get a little bit with Alice setting up what she's doing. Obviously we knew that she was going to try and use up all the like spatial or magic resources in the area so that the dark mages couldn't use it. They haven't been really introduced yet on the enemy side of things, so we'll see what happens. But we see the start of that. As more and more people are dying, their sort of deaths are sort of adding to the sort of energy in the air. and Alice is absorbing all of that into her own magic, and she's forming this giant sphere up in the air. It seems to be a sort of a metal or mirror-like ball, and we'll see what the explanation is on that. It's a pretty cool explanation, but the anime hasn't explained it yet. But just know that that's what Alice is doing here. She's preparing this incredible attack up in the sky that's using as much energy as possible, and that will prevent the enemy mages from doing anything particularly powerful. So yeah, that's my thoughts on this week's episode of Sword Art Online. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are, but that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.